What's going on, guys? It's Roganeman here, and welcome to the first episode of the off season. So we're gonna be covering any releases, any trades, and any potential signings that's going to be happening over the next 3 months that the teams have to confirm their rosters. So today we're going to be going over quite a few releases, some going into free agency, some just retiring straight up. So there's a lot to go over. I think we've got Washington, we've got some from Shock, Dallas, Fusion, Toronto, Hunters, Boston, Rain, and Gladiators, I believe. Oh, yeah, and Florida. So quite a few have already started releasing. Obviously, yesterday was the deadline for them to start signing the contracts if they want to continue their players. So we got a few releases yesterday. Next week is when free agency starts, so we may start seeing signings then, but it's unlikely that we start to see signings for at least a couple more months because obviously the teams have to then decide who they want to sign in terms of Overwatch 2 because obviously it's a completely different game. They're not sure who they're going to want on their roster, and that is completely fair enough. So, without further ado, we have to go way back to the end of September. So, on September 9th, the Houston Outlaws technically released, but that he retired. So KSF retired from professional Overwatch. Then 3 weeks later, just this past week, Paris Eternal confirmed that they're actually going to be keeping on Avala for the 2022 season. That was their general manager, so that's amazing. There's gonna be more in Paris that isn't so good, but it's great that they managed to get Avala back because she did an amazing job getting this Paris team together this past season and keeping them in high spirits, keeping them competitive. So it's great that they managed to get her back. So sticking with that Paris theme, they actually had more announcements. So Paris actually ended up releasing their head coach, Get Amazed, Suna, which was one of their DPS, only got surprisingly, and Vestola. So this is big for Paris because Get Amazed was probably one of the big factors in the fact that they may play in this season. So who they get in is going to be a quick question mark at the moment, but I think if they can get in the right person to manage this EU talent, then they could. There's no reason they can't make another run and do well in season 5. So obviously the releases of Only God, Suna, and Vestoro are big, but I think it's important to note that they kept their core together. They kept Naga, Dawn, and Khan, and Dridro, which honestly were their core for that team. So Vestola, yes, but they can bring in someone like. There's actually another person who I expect them to bring in who's actually going into free agency, so I'll bring that up because he's also a EU talent. But Only God was probably what surprised me the most because he was that veteran presence that they had on the team that seemed to be not explosive, but he seemed to bring balance to the team. So I'm thinking they're probably releasing Only God to then bring in some explosive DPS playmaking talent to go alongside Naga. And there's quite a few options for them, honestly. If they don't want to stick with this EU talent and go more mixed like they were in season 3, season 2, then they could do that. If not, then there's a lot of EU talent that they could scout around in contenders. There's a lot going around at the moment, especially going into Overwatch 2. So, then going on, we're gonna backtrack a little bit now. We have the Outlaws, who actually released Juby and Crimzo, and they've both gone into free agency, which is kind of surprising for me. I'm not gonna lie. They also ended up releasing Django as well, and I believe recently as well. They've also released Dreamer. They don't have a main tank anymore, which is kind of big because it's not really something I was expecting them to do. I was expecting them to keep either Dreamer or Django because obviously they had two main tanks. If you're cutting down the roster, you're gonna want to keep one. But if they're releasing both of them, I mean, there's no reason they can't bring them back. They're going into free agency. They've not released Streamer. He's just looking for a team at the moment, so there's every possibility that he does come back to Houston. There's a lot of teams that are just letting their players explore free agency, see if there's another team that they would like to go to, which is fair enough. But Django was big. He didn't really play much, but he was an explosive main tank that really made a difference on this team, so that was surprising. As for Crimzo, I was surprised by this. I mean, what surprised me the most was the fact that they kept the player coach. I mean, it's obvious that they were going to keep him, but like, the only support that they have left now is Jake, and I would have thought that you'd want to double down on Crimzo or Juvie, and I think Crimzo would have been the better one to double down on. So, where they go from here is interesting, because this could be a complete rebuild to the Outlaws. I mean, they're keeping most of their core, they're keeping their DPS core, but everything else is gone. So that's going to be interesting to see where they go from there. As for the Philadelphia Fusion, so the Fusion ended up announcing that Mano is going to be taking a break from professional Overwatch because he has to fulfill his military service in the Korean military. There's quite a few players that are actually going ahead and doing this now, so yeah, it makes sense. Obviously, they have to do it eventually, so what can you do? Fusion also ended up letting Flooding Astro go into free agency, which, I mean, is expected that he's going to return, but there's every opportunity that he could go elsewhere, and I think going to an EU team could be a good thing for him if he wants location based. There's a load of other teams. I mean, Fuel are looking for a main support at the moment. He could be a good fit on Fuel with Dilder, so there's a lot of places that he could go if he wants to, but I expect him to stay at the Philadelphia Fusion. Then moving over, I'm gonna lump all of the Florida stuff together now, because they ended up releasing their assistant coach docs at the start of September, but then just recently they actually ended up releasing basically their entire team apart from Yaki, and it's expected that they're gonna go full Western, so it seems that they found a trade partner for Yaki, and that's why they haven't released him. But as said, they've released OG, they've released Gargoyle, Slime, Gangnam Jin, and BQB, and Checkmate from their contracts. They're all in free agency now, and I expect people like BQB, Gargoyle, and Gangnam Jin to get a team pretty easily. But whether Checkmate retires, whether OG retires, OG has been kind of flip flopping in and out of the league quite a bit now. So whether he retires or not is up in the air. And Slime, I mean, Slime could get a team. He's obviously a part of that famous runaway team that dominated the league in 2019 on the Titans, but his Lucio's looked good this season, but his main support play hasn't been the best. So it's up in the air whether something could pick him up. Maybe an APOC team could pick him up, but we're not really sure who's gonna pick him up at this point. I don't expect him to go right to a team, but he could. Now quickly touching on the Atlanta Reign, the only thing we have on them at the moment is that they've let Massa go into free agency. Now, I fully expect Massa to return to the Atlanta Reign. Obviously, they've just gotten to the grand finals, for goodness sake, so it makes sense that he sticks with the Atlanta Reign. But if he wants to move for location, he could move to a team like Paris Eternal or London Spitfire, or he could go to another team in NA if he really wants to. But I don't expect him to move anywhere apart from maybe just staying at the Atlanta Reign. Now another big release. Now this is something that has happened every year for this team. They've always ditched their entire roster since season 2, and like kept a couple. And this time it's Hisu that survived, so that gives away the team is the Toronto Defiant. So the Toronto Defiant have released Ansun J, Lastro, Aztec, Michelle, Sado, Nice, and Spire, and Bojix. And then they've also released their assistant coach, Horchi Lee, so it seems that they're getting a complete rework. It's expected that Hisu's gonna stay. It doesn't seem like they found a trade partner for him, so they could go full Korean, which I'm expecting them to do, but it's strange that they've dropped all of these players. I expect players like Nice, Aspire, Lastro, and maybe Michelle to find teams, but it's up in the air for the rest of them, honestly. Lastro could honestly end up going back to the Valiant. I know the Valiant general manager, or the general manager of the Immortals group, has actually commented on Lastro going into free agency, so there's a possibility that should the Valiant return to NA, that they could pick up Lastro. Or even if they don't, Lasher is Korean, so obviously he could just travel over there, and if they stay in APAC, then they could actually build a respectable roster this time around. So there's that. But yeah, it's strange that they've released all of their teams. I mean, it's not strange; it's defiant. They've done it every season, but releasing players like Aspire is wild to me because he was honestly one of their best exclusive playmakers. It's as nice as well. Lastro was a pretty good player for them. Ansu and Jay was up and down. Um, but it's gonna be interesting to see where the Defiant go from here because honestly, they could go anywhere. Now, the Dallas Fuel. This is something that completely annoyed me. So they've released their assistant coach Young, but that's expected because he's got to fulfill his military duty. So he should be back in about 2 years when he's finished his military duty in Korea. But the big thing for the Dallas Fuel was that they've released Jaxa, they've released Pine, and Rappel has retired. So that's expected sort of, but the fact that they've released Pine after not playing at all, and then they gave him a tweet saying thank you for all of your hard work. He didn't even play. I mean, obviously there was a lot of work trying to get the visa, and they've been screwed over by visas. So yes, to an extent, but still, what could have been with Pine? I mean, Pine and Sparkle DPS duo could have been one of the best in the league. And I really do hope that Pine can get a team going into Overwatch 2. He's hinted that we may see him again, but it's just a shame of what could have been. Had COVID not been around, obviously he would have been able to play. There's every opportunity that he could go back to the New York Excelsior, which, I mean, that wouldn't surprise me, but who knows. Now, going back over to the Fusion real quick, they have let Poco go into free agency, so this kind of links up with my Paris Eternal thing, because I'm expecting after they've released the Pistola that they're going to go and pick up Poco, because obviously he's a French talent. Poco being with the Philadelphia Fusion since season 1, so that's big. Them releasing him, obviously, you don't want to stick with one org for too long, you want to change the scenery, and being able to play professional Overwatch in his home country would be a big thing for him, I feel like. So he could definitely go to the Paris Turtle, and that's the one pickup I can almost definitely see them making. So, moving over to the two-time champions, we have San Francisco Shock letting Twilight go into free agency. So, it's expected that he'll probably go back to Shock. I mean, I don't know where else he'd go, but still, they've let him go into free agency. So if he gets a better offer, he could go. But the thing with Shock players is, if you're going to Shock, yes, you're committing to excellence. Obviously, that is all Krusty probably accepts. But the thing is, you're committing to sitting on the bench a lot of the time because their starting roster talents are so good. I mean, yes, it's good that they've got two systems now where they can rotate in and out, but if you're a player like Twilight, I'd imagine you're going to be wanting consistent starting jobs. So it kind of makes sense for him to be moving away, but we'll have to see. He could end up honestly just staying at the Shock, which wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. Um, Now, finally wrapping up, we obviously have some LA Gladiators news. We have Washington Justice, and then wrapping up, we'll wrap up with some Boston and Chengdu Hunters. So, starting with the Gladiators, they've released main tank Muse, which was honestly shocking to me, but after seeing the test game that they did in Grand Finals for Overwatch 2, it kind of makes sense that they're going to be committing to Muse as their, no, sorry, not Muse, Space as their main tank, and just their tank specialist going forwards. He's obviously been practicing the Reinhardt on Overwatch 2. He's been fantastic on Zarya, on Diva, on Sigma, especially. So it makes sense that they're gonna release Muse, and I hope Muse will definitely find a team going elsewhere. Maybe an APAC team will pick him up, but he was such a good playmaker on that Gladiators team, who was probably pivotal to their success. He's just been a solid, especially for being a rookie. He's just been a solid main tank. And then the other release was Mirror, who has been released, which makes sense because they're obviously going to want to commit down to Capster and Birdring for their starting duo. So Mirror getting released makes sense. He should find another team. He could go down to any contenders. We'll have to see where he goes. But yeah, that is the LA Gladiators. Now, the Washington Justice have made a couple of changes. So they've released a DPS Tuba, who's also been flexing onto support every now and then, main support Closer, as well as their coach, Lee or Hokuri. So Tuba expected. He didn't really get to play that much. Whether or not he retires or not, is yet to be seen. Now, Closer is a different story. We've actually had an update from Closer, and Closer has said that he's going to be taking a step back from professional Overwatch for now because he wants to pursue he doesn't want to pursue. He has to do his military service in Korea. So that's yet another player that we're losing because they have to do mandatory military service, which is understandable. They have to do their duty in their country. That's fair enough. Moving over to the Chengdu Hunters, Amang has actually been released into free agency, which was shocking. In a way, because this has been like their go-to ball and main tank since they became an expansion team way back when. So him being released is huge, but it makes sense that they're going to commit down to Gaga. Gaga obviously being able to flex onto multiple other main tanks as well as being able to play the ball. Makes sense that they're going to release Gaga here. Sorry, not Gaga, I'm aiming here. So I expect him to find another team. I mean, he could definitely go onto a team like the Guangzhou Charge or the Spark. I mean, the Spark have been trying to experiment with the bull strategies, so he could go there. But he could also just end up going down to Chinese contenders for a little bit. And then moving over, wrapping up, Boston Uprising have released Color Hex, who has entered free agency. He's been with the team since they joined the league, which is huge. So I mean, it makes sense. They've got Valentine and they've got N37, so they don't really need Color Hex. He was really only subbing in to play the Tracer whenever they need to play Tracer, but it makes sense just to train one of their starting DPS on the Tracer role rather than having him subbing in and weighing down their wage bill, so to speak. So yeah, that wraps up the first episode of my off-season series. So what do you think of all of these releases? And do you think many of these players are going to find teams? Let me know in the comment section below. And as always, hit that like button if you liked the video, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!